Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode is a writer of epic, gritty fantasy. They're also a black belt in karate, a HEMA practitioner, and a certified first aider.
She has written time novels for Marvel, a Warhammer horror novel, and has penned both the Godblind and the Songs of the Drowned trilogies, the latest book of which is called The Jaguar Path, is out now in hardback. We would like to warmly welcome Anna Stevens.
Hello, Anna.
Hello. Thank you both so much for having me on. Very excited for this chat.
Oh, don't thank us yet. We haven't even started.
You haven't torn my story to pieces yet. I mean, there's still time.
It's just psychological trauma. That's normally...
Yeah, I mean, I have listened to a few of your episodes and I am quite intimidated by the level of talent that both of you display and also your guests. So...
Well, that's incredibly kind, but also
nice.
You have no fear. It's we're just about telling stories with each other, really.
Good.
I noticed from your website, which I really enjoyed reading through, by the way. It sounds like a weird compliment, but I actually do read a lot of writers' websites to sort of figure out where they're at and how how to contact them and things like this. And yours is written in a very engaging, personal tone, which I really connected with, and I really enjoyed how your about section features a fairly sort of strongly worded love letter to local libraries.
Indeed, yes.
And I was sort of wondering what reading advice you would give to our perhaps younger listeners taking their first foray into a local library.
Ooh, wow, that's a good question. I mean, I will say that my local library, I still live within a couple of miles of basically where I grew up.
Oh, wow.
So my local library is still the same local library that I started going to when I was, I don't know, 3 or however old. And it has changed so significantly in the last 40 years. I mean, obviously, I was much shorter then, but I do remember going in and there just being these towering bookshelves everywhere you went, these brown wooden bookshelves that seemed to stretch up to the ceiling. And I went in not long ago and they're just like sort of head height 4 or 5 bookshelves on wheels, and everything else is sort of given over to. There's an IT station and the breakout tables for, studying, and they'd have little groups there and stuff. And I just remember thinking this is not the library that I grew up in. And it was a real shame. It was very sad to see how they've had to diversify in order to stay open. And so with that in mind, I would always say they're probably not going to have my book in stock because I've never been in a library that has had a really solid genre fiction section. But, if you fancy reading a book and you don't want to buy it, just order it in through your local library. It doesn't cost you a penny, but the more people who order it, the more the librarian will think, oh, actually, maybe we should just buy a few copies. But I mean, from a purely mercenary point of view, I get paid something like 6p every time somebody borrows my book, whereas my royalty rate is like half a p. So I mean, by all means, order it from the library, read it, love it, then buy yourself a copy, and then that works out best for me personally.
I'm really caught on that because I'm a musician, and the way this feels like the difference between someone buying your CD and listening to your music on Spotify, except they're buying your CD and you're making nothing in the equivalent. Do you know what I mean? That's actually really crazy.
Yeah, I mean the difference is quite is always quite stark when it comes to royalties versus public lending right, which is what I'm talking about with the libraries. And I mean, if your royalty rate is, for example, pulling a number out of the air, 7% off a paperback, and Amazon is running a 99p deal, you're not getting 7% of the cost of the paperback, you're getting 7% of 99p.
Yeah.
So deals are great for bringing in new readers and building an audience, and they'll hopefully they'll then stick with you and go back and buy your other books at more expensive prices. But public lending right, I mean, like I said, it costs absolutely nothing. It costs you nothing. You get a library card, you don't have to pay for the library card, you get to borrow a book for 2 weeks, you get there is nothing not to love about libraries. They are wonderful spaces, and I mean, especially when we were going through that, the horrible cost of living crisis, and the fact that no one could afford to put the heating on last winter. The number of people, old people who couldn't afford to put the heating on, or people with young families who were all going to libraries because it was free and it was warm. But you have to repay the libraries for doing that for you. And the best way to do it is to just, foot traffic, just go in there, read some books. I mean, you can borrow audiobooks from there now. You can borrow ebooks from there now. I don't know how it works. It sounds a little bit like alchemy, but but yeah, they're great resources. Free internet. You can go in and log on to the internet.
Also, if you want to help your local library inexpensively, I cannot overstate how simple it is to go in there and print stuff or photocopy stuff. And they don't charge a lot of money for it. So if you do want to help your local library and you're having a birthday party and you hand on an invite, go and do 10 photocopies and give them £1. It really does help.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've immediately learned something. Like, we haven't even gotten into the stories yet, and I've already learned something about the publishing industry. So that's absolutely fascinating. But I think the stories beckon. So our regular listeners know how it goes, but for those of you joining us for the first time, there's going to be 3 stories told in this episode. All of them have been written to the same shared prompt. This week, the prompt is ROAR. That's ROAR. Nico, you are up first, my friend.
Roar. The people of fair Albion were gathered neath the moon to await the words of wickedness they feared may well come soon, for the elder hag of Middenswaith was spected to appear, and the hour of her doing so, it drew yet ever near. The people they did mutter and throw glances overhead, lest the stars be blotted out by wings alofting burning dread. For the beast their flocks had taken, then their children, one by one. To the hag they sought, for something ought, they reckoned, to be done. Why should we trust that wretched thing? A woodsman he did cry. She's more evil yet than any beast. There's none here that deny. You fool! Another called to him. She may be foe of folk, but she spares us from her devil's work. I promise she's not broke. You're right, called out their village chief. Both of you, in your words. But I am certain these misdeeds, they are no work of hers. I saw the beast when it came down to clutch at labour's beasts. I heard that terror sound when it began its nightly feast. It's black as coal from mountain's pit, save its teeth which shine a white, and its sallow eyes, those pools of dread, wax dreadful in moonlight. He speaks the truth, came voice of crone from in the whirling mists. The people gasped, as now she stood where once she'd not exist. The monster you speak of we call the drake, or dragon true. Its hunger knows no limits, and all here it shall consume. The people cried in outrage at her prophecy of doom. Some mothers wept of babes they'd lost to stomach, ne'er to tomb. The chieftain spoke, Please, hag of hags, an answer is all we seek. Is there a hope for us to live? We'll listen if you speak. A chance you seek, a chance you'll have. The prize? It shall be high. Some heroes will be called to thee, but in this they will die. And the dragon, cried the people, oh, that beast will be no more. As she said it, they did hear between the mountains something roar. Their spines were set a quiver as the monster was made real. We will sacrifice those noble folk. The chieftain made that deal. Then, whence upon the morrow, when a warrior's troop arrives, accept their deal to save yourselves, but sacrifice their lives. The folk returned to shelter, to await the sun anew, and prepared to trade some goodly folk, lest they become its food. Good people, came a charming voice, as clear as lakes of glass. I wish not to alarm you, but my group and I must pass. My name is Lady Verity, a paladin of light. My companion Lance, a sorcerer, and Uhtred, bane of blight. Please feel no need to step outside, and we'll be on our way. We thank you for the passage, and bid you a pleasant day. Please wait, called out the chieftain, as from hovel he did spring. May I beseech you, Verity, to help us with something? Good sir, the paladin did bow, so noble in pursuit. My chums and I will lend a hand, if our skill set should suit. Uhtred is a cleric who can heal whatever ails, and good Lance, in terms of magic, other wizards' labours pale. Myself, I am a fighter, with my blade and shield of oak. We would lend these skills to aid you goodly devil-fearing folk. It is help we need, the chieftain cried. Please help our folk be spared, for a dragon with its malice has our young within its lair. O'er yonder hills the beast does lurk, and nightly screaming comes. Speak no more, the paladin did smile. We'll see it done. Are you sure on this? The sorcerer did whisper, face askance. Oh, hush, old friend. They'd think you were afraid, my dearest Lance. But a dragon, Verity, Uhtred did mutter, filled with fear. Yes, a dragon, friend, but with us three success is always near. The sorcerer and cleric did a look between them share, for they were wise and swift of mind as Verity was fair. A plan, then, said the conjurer, to slay this dreaded foe. Those always work, Uhtred remarked, though in the voice below. I may well have a spell for this, the mage withdrew a tone. Collapse its wings, or chain its feet, or set its heart to stone. The paladin did laugh anew, a sound as sweet as sun. Just do your best, my dearest friends. The day will soon be won. Before too long, they found themselves before the monstrous den. The littering of bones forewarned of what resides within. It's not too late, poor Uhtred said. His heart was gripped by ice. Those folk were kindly, sure enough, but need we be so nice? Please, Lance and sweetest Verity, this seems too much for me. I do not think we can succeed, even with might of 3. A dozen couldn't slay a beast that leaves so many bones. What would you do? Asked Verity. Let flames destroy their homes? Let children be the thing the drake doth pick from 'tween its fangs? You're better than that, Uhtred, twice as wise as any man. And Lance, good Lance, so powerful that he could part the seas. 'Twas a river, muttered Lance, though at the praise was rightly pleased. He is master of the elements, and you, who lives and dies. She smiled and drew her sword and called, Come, beast, your doom is nigh. There was nothing for a moment. Then a rumble came in low, and it found some other noises, and they rose so very slow, till the roar had manifested and did suffocate the ears, and Uhtred near filled his breeches with the shaking of his rear. It boiled round them deep and loud, like pain reborn as sound, and a mighty crashing shook their feet as something stomped the ground. As into light their enemy did slowly start to slink, the hope in hearts, save Verity's, did swiftly sudden sink. Its scales were dark as ebony and shone in midday's glow. Its neck did stretch impossibly, and wider it did grow. Great wings afolded against its frame were broad as naval sails, and there, a seeming mile back, its forked tip of tail. Who are you? Its voice did ooze, like oil over chain. You've come to die, I do suppose, it said with malice plain. I'm Verity, she cried, and I shall be your end. She held her sword and shield aloft and nodded to her friends. I am the one they call the death of innocence, it spoke. Defiler of the commoner, devourer of folk. Who are you, O Verity, the smallest yet of knights? Come to meet your end with me. Enjoy your last of fights. She charged it then, a chanting she called on faith divine, and the light of all her majesty about the blade did twine. Well, sod the plan, apparently, said Lance, exasperated. Start casting Uth, she'll need your help, lest be obliterated. Uhtred began a simple spell to pass strength to the girl, and Lance began to call upon the magics of the world. Come, elements, to me come twist about mine hands. Rain fire from the heavens, strike this monster from these lands. Between his hands an orb of flame as green as ocean deep. Into it, magic from the space around him it did creep. He called again, to me, his voice a wild scream, and he let the hellish firebolt take flight towards the fiend. It struck, as did the paladin, brought strength by cleric's words, and the dragon did recoil, by their might it had been hurt. Have you enough, you scaly? Verity stumbled for a word. Bastard, cried the sorcerer. Wart, foul creature, turd. Verity did chuckle as the words rang round her helm. Then the dragon roared its cry again, and then unleashed hell. Too late did Uhtred raise his hands to summon up a shield. The wizard, to the heat he felt his body instant yield. For a gout of flame so terrible had poured from ancient moor, and the wizard and the cleric soon were ashes, and no more. In grief sweet Verity did cry, and plunged her sword aloft. In the throat she took the dragon, when the monstrous lizard coughed. It split around her magic blade, and from the wound came gore, but the cut was deep, and with it came a little something more. The secretions of a dragon, which are flammable as coals, were spilled out on the paladin and drenched her to her soul. She battled on, and pushing hard, did slit its throat apart, till she reached the very muscle where the flames were made to start. With a spasm it ignited, splitting dragon top to base, and young Verity did feel the flames awash across her face. The people, they were saved then, by what that girl had done, but the heroes 3 and dragon from the world were ever gone.
Good fucking Christ, man! What?
Wow.
That was amazing. For those listening, he did that in one take as well, which is just bonkers. I mean,
That was
I'm actually
so good.
Go ahead.
I wrote down rhyming opening and then just scribbled out opening halfway through. I was like, he's not. Oh my God.
Done it.
It was both easier than normal and more difficult. So I'm a lyricist first and foremost, really.
Mm.
So rhymes come to me anyway, and I have to kind of not do them, to ignore them. So it was really fun to let the narrative weave, and I really enjoy that process of the rhyme. You write the first line and then just trust that the rhyme will come, and it's really satisfying as it comes out. But
it's satisfying to listen to it work as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
The way that it links up. I mean, I've written some poetry before, but it takes me ages, and I'm really bad at rhyming. And so that idea of you write a line and then you write the next line. I have to plan out the whole stanza and how the rhyming structure is going to work before I actually start tinkering with the words. So that's really impressive and really fucking good as well. It wasn't. You didn't just. I don't know how many words it was, but it felt like it was near our normal word cap. Was it about 1,000 or so?
It was 1534.
Crikey! So you actually went over in rhyming.
I did.
Wow, that's incredibly impressive. You've really blown me away there, man.
Was there something about the prompt that made you decide to write it in verse, or was it you got the idea of the sort of the classic dragon slaying and then thought, oh, let's do that in rhyme?
It started with I felt in the raw. I was really drawn to that idea of a sort of like the roaring of a dragon in the night and the heroes coming to do it. And I do things aloud when I'm coming up with ideas, and I'll say things to try them. And, does that feel right? Does that feel good? And it just naturally came to this kind of, I really like in fantasy books, especially when you get those nice little 2-line stanzas that do a bit of story. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to try and have like something a bard would say in a town square to tell the story in that way?
Yeah,
and
I can imagine this like with a lute in a tavern with everyone, like sort of, especially if you had like a couple of sort of repeating couplets in there or something that everyone could sort of, get their teeth into and shout along with the person.
I totally agree. I think you'd also drink for free that night.
Yeah, definitely.
Ah, wonderful. So it's actually an epic poem then, really, isn't it? That's because it's a lengthy narrative poem.
Yeah,
that's the definition. So I mean, phenomenal. Some great references in there as well, and like nods to other works that I think you've encountered or enjoyed.
Yeah.
Like, I think Hag of Hags is what Pratchett used to describe Esme Weatherwax.
Esme, yeah.
And obviously Uhtred for Bernard Cornwall.
Yeah.
And then I felt like I felt like the actual like rhyming, and maybe it was the performance that gave me this angle, but it gave me like a bit of an enormous Crocodile Roald Dahl vibe in places.
I can see that, yeah.
But also Bilbo's stuff from The Hobbit and sort of Tolkien writing for Bilbo, because it was all kind of funny, wasn't it? You had like you sort of tongue out in some of the lines.
Yeah, especially where Verity couldn't think of an insult, and Uhtred goes, "Bastard!" I love that bit. I was like, yeah.
I think my favourite line in the whole thing is when she says, "Oh, he could part the seas. 'Twas a river."
I wrote that down.
I absolutely love that moment. But I think if we can talk about where the inspiration is, especially it's why I think I ended up with that kind of Somerset accent in there. It's all Pamers. This kind of poetry, that simple rhyming, but sort of like using accent to twist what does rhyme and what doesn't. And so she's got incredibly beautiful poems, and a lot of them don't look quite right written down. And then you listen to her read them, and they rhyme or they have the right rhythm because she has a West Country accent.
Yes, it's all the dialect, isn't it?
She's got a great little short poem. It goes, "My mother had a flit gun. It was not devoid of charm. A bit of flit shot out of it. The rest shot up her arm." And it's just it's things like that. I think it doesn't look like anything written down, but in the voice, it's just wonderful.
Arm. Oh, I also wrote down, "But need we be so nice?" I felt that one. It had a certain quality to it that just kept me smiling throughout. I found myself to be quite literally beaming from ear to ear, pretty much from line one, and just incredibly satisfying and enjoyable listen. Yeah, really good, really good.
I really enjoyed the fact that the crone was surprisingly well spoken.
Yeah,
and then she was basically getting the villagers. She was getting good people to make a very bad choice. Some people would argue that it was a bad choice that they made. And then when Verity turned up, and she was also very well spoken, my brain immediately went, the crone is actually enchanted, and she's actually like a rival to Verity's power or position or something like that. And so she's sort of turned up as a crone, and she may even have engineered the whole thing with the dragon in order to get rid of Verity and her companions.
I like that interpretation. I think
I definitely did all that on purpose. Definitely.
I think you gave it a real intrigue there, which I always appreciate in stories.
I think the biggest challenge with it, because you can't really go into too much description if you're trying to keep the pace going and keep that rhythm feeling right, was getting character for the three heroes in. And I think I mean, Verity was very easy because she's just, she's a paladin. Everything is, we can do this. What ho? Let's go. But I think making Uhtred and Lance have their own personalities. I did cheat a bit by making Uhtred a bit of a coward and Lance just a bit of a wanker. But I think I managed to get it was a river. I think I managed to get the balance in there, but I actually would have liked to have some more words, I think, to let it breathe and maybe give a bit of a resolution where you could show, yes, that problem's dealt with, but you've taken good people out of the world. And I think it's the implication of that is there enough that it doesn't suffer too much for it.
And you had some really good lines as well. I mean, the stomach near to tomb I wrote down. I just thought, whoa, that's a good line. And also pain reborn as sound, I really loved. I think they, I think you kept to the rhyme and you kept to the rhythm, but you still managed to, you put those, that imagery and those metaphors in there, and I think they really did a lot of sort of heavy lifting, even though they seem like quite simple lines, but actually they really added a lot of sort of emotional depth.
I agree. I think that's very insightful.
It's both been unbelievably complimentary.
Well, that's what happens when you knock it out of the park, my friend. So well done. However, I think we should move on.
I don't want to.
I know. I'm already thinking, wow, it's really shit to be going last in this scenario.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Right.
But if you are ready and you've got the stomach for it, we'll move on.
Okay. Right. So Raw again. The CST 488 Burgeoning Hope. Aggro Deck 2, Port Side Stern. Alpha crept like wire blight down the corridor, worn rubber shoes made from cannibalized pipe insulation squeaking against the metal floor. Her heart slammed against her ribs and she rubbed her thumb against the smooth, ancient laser pistol, unconvinced it worked. She didn't dare risk a test shot in case she woke whatever lay ahead. Unless it's already awake and waiting for me. If that were true, Alpha would shoot every bolt she had and run screaming in the other direction. Supposing it fired. Supposing the thing let her run. If not, well, there would definitely be screaming. She approached a light well, the sun they were orbiting describing a swift, incandescent arc around the corridor, pulsing in through each aperture in turn until the middle of the corridor was strobed in alien sun and her destination beyond it invisible despite squinting. The metal floor and metal wall were both silent and cold beneath her feet and trembling hand. The engines that stabilized the ship's orbit hadn't lived in 3 generations now. The only thing they still had was standard G, courtesy of the massive solar power gravity ring spinning around the dead ship. It gave them up and down, but couldn't prevent them falling serenely and silently and without obvious complaint into the sun's gravity well. Their engineers estimated they had another 5 Earth standard years before there was no way out, even with functioning engines. If only burning up in the atmosphere of a hostile sun was their biggest problem. Alpha took a few more steps and then flipped down her visor, cutting the fierceness of the strobing light until the corridor beyond was visible. There was another light well, and another, set every 250 meters along the wide, curving corridor that led eventually to the first set of sealed blast doors. Beyond those doors, generations ago, a disaster had ripped through their transport, killed the engines and all but the 100 or so agro-scientists and farmhands tending the algae pools, and left them to live, die, and circle a star until they fell in. Burgeoning hope, my arse. When Alpha had signed up as a scavenger looking for components, resources, and alternate routes to the engines, she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected this corridor, those sealed blast doors. And she definitely hadn't expected the possibility of facing down whatever had got into the other end of the ship at some point in the last decade. But the truth was, there were no other routes left to explore. No other corridors left that went in the right direction and weren't open to vacuum. Ventilation had sealed to prevent fire spread, and the EVA suits they had were old and few. The plant life that kept them alive produced more than enough oxygen for them to live, but with the engines dead, they had no way to compress it into tanks. The one experiment with an air umbilical when Alpha had been a child was still bumping around somewhere on their hull. Turned out a human couldn't breathe through a few 100 meters of narrow tube. He'd lost consciousness, and then the umbilical had snagged on something, and that was it. And we didn't even get to put him in the fertilizer. Alpha stepped through the sweep of sunlight, convinced she felt its heat despite the thickness of the window, and into the darkness beyond. Stepped over the rim of open blast doors, fingertips brushing the dusty control panel for luck, and on, leaving light behind and walking towards more. More light, same sun. 5 Earth Standard years. 1 more kilometre to the seal, and beyond, eventually, to the engine rooms. 4 decks above that, and another kilometre forward, main navigation. She knew the layout of the ship from the plans lasered into bulkheads at each main corridor junction. Each had been painstakingly amended in paint after every significant recon mission. She'd watched over the years as every other viable route to the engine room had been crossed off. In her youthful hubris, she'd been convinced she'd be the one to find the last remaining safe and open route. Instead, she'd been ordered here, to this, the one route they knew took them through hostile territory. Alpha was descended from botanists and agriculturalists. She knew the seeding properties of zero-G barley and the pollination cycle of plants that had evolved in response to the absence of a home sun. She didn't know what lay beyond those blast doors. No one did. They knew only of its rage. She glanced reflexively down at the chest harness and the camera it held. There was another on the barrel of the pistol, though whether that worked along with the gun itself remained to be seen. Whatever she was seeing, so were they, unless it crept up on her from behind. Alpha's mouth dried and she glanced back. Nothing but a ring of light. She kept going. As part of her training, Alpha had read every manual the AgDec had and all those found by her predecessors as they crawled around the ship looking for ways to resurrect it. She had theoretical knowledge not only of the engines themselves, but of navigation too. If she made it to the engine room, she could call for backup to help with the startup procedures. And with control of the engine deck, they'd be 1 step closer to getting out of the gravity well. To going home, whatever that meant, wherever that was. Pistol in her sweating grip, Alpha strode towards the next light well, through it and over the blast door rim, and the next, visor flipping down and up as necessary, until, abruptly, she was there. The sealed door. Beyond it, 500 meters to the main engine room. A single mad dash. Alpha peered through the aperture. The distant light well strobing revealed nothing between her and it, and nothing beyond. Everything lost to pulsing light and pulsing shadow. Before she could lose her nerve, she slapped her hand against the pad. With a hiss of atmosphere and a low grind, dust and dirt in the tracks, the door slid aside. A waft of foul air engulfed Alpha, and she held her breath, wrinkling her nose and pistol raised in both hands. Shooter's stance. Nothing. No movement. Just the silence of a dead ship tumbling around a hungry star. She waited for so long her arms started to tremble under the pistol's weight, and then stepped over the rim and in. 500 meters. A single mad dash. Another step. Another, faster, shifting her weight into the balls of her feet, preparing to run. A low, ominous rumble echoed towards her, growing and fading like breath, like her breath if she could remember to breathe. She raised the pistol again and dared another step, and the rumble came again and then grew in volume, louder and higher pitched, a sudden roar of rage and vengeance and need and hunger, so much hunger. Alpha's hands tightened convulsively and she squeezed off a shot. The pistol kicked, the laser projectile digging a trench through the metal wall 30 meters away. The roar cut off into abrupt, vengeful silence. In the distance, metal scraped on metal, and there was, perhaps, the suggestion of a shadow moving, counter to their tumble around the sun. Shit. 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 Alpha turned and ran. Habby pod, deck 2, starboard side aft. I heard something. Down there, I heard it. It's just the ship settling. Come on, it's time. But I heard it, Mummy, I really did. Enora smiled down at the boy. Maybe it was the ship saying goodbye. She winked. They had enough time for this, surely. Come on then, one last go? Yes, Micah shouted, and they crouched together at the ventilation shaft. Faces crowded into the metal tube. Enora put her arm around her son's back, and they bellowed cheerfully into the shaft, their shouts combining and twisting into something weird and monstrous as it bounced down and around and away, the boy's laugh following it. Can I do this on the new ship? Micah asked as he stood and Enora brushed him down. I'm afraid not, son. It's a long-range scout ship, remember? Grandpa should have saved a bigger ship, Micah grumbled. Enora gave him a pointed stare and he ducked his head, looked one last time at the duct in the corner of their room, and then bounded out. Enora glanced around their living space, walls scrawled with youthful drawings, the only home she'd ever known, and then she followed. We're the very last survivors, Micah. We are the burgeoning hope. Let's go find a new world to live in.
Well, I don't think you needed to worry. That was extremely strong. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Really drew me in. I love how you managed to get a happy ending in a
for some of them.
Yeah, well, for some of them, yes, I know, but it had this very bleak end throughout. This idea of slowly sinking into a hostile sun is just, and then other people are just leaving. that idea of having two groups, that reveal at the end, it's really good storytelling. Yeah, fantastic.
I got really caught on the guy they tried to send outside.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
The phrase was still bumping around the hull. There's something so hot, disturbing about it.
I know.
And then to be shortly followed with, we didn't even get to put him in the fertilizer.
Yeah.
Oh. But to have so much knowledge of plants, not be like, he'll be okay if we just give him a hose and send him out there, right? Yeah.
That I spent ages on that bit. I put way too much detail in, and then thought I don't have the word count for this, so I just had to hope that the audience would get it. The idea that you can't actually, breathe enough oxygen through like a really narrow gap.
Yeah. Over a long distance as well. Oh. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I actually wrote down that I feel like your writing is somehow both luxurious and concise. Like there's a brevity to it, but you get everything across really, really well, and it feels like you're taking your time with it. And I really enjoyed that style. I think it's a really difficult thing to achieve, and I think it shows a certain mastery of the medium that you did it.
Thank you.
In pretty much every line through the whole thing. Like, I know there were some longer sentences, but they were deliberate to build the tension or to draw out a scene.
Yeah.
Tour de force, I think.
You have
thank you.
You have an armory of dread as well.
Yeah.
You have these different things that are. It's like, I just need a sort of stiletto of dread here, and you do such a good job of. There's that moment where you said, if only being trapped in, a gravity well around an alien sun was the worst of their issues. Because it frames whatever is coming in such a way that you hang on. Because
what do you mean?
Sound very long in that situation. And you think, no, what's happening? Who's coming?
And the 5 years was also a nod to Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars.
Oh, very nice.
Cool. Nice.
Very nice. This idea of them being
My
trapped
husband
for
will be
generations
very
as well.
proud of that.
Oh, good. Big Bowie fan.
He is, yeah, he is.
Wonderful. I was going to say the idea of them being trapped for generations as well. I particularly enjoyed that. I recently saw the Robert Pattinson starring High Life science fiction movie, and that itself has some sort of Solaris, SF dread horror stuff happening in it, and psychological horror, and I coloured in the ship in my imagination for your story with the ship from that movie, because it felt very connected to me. I don't know whether it's just because I've recently watched that or what, but it was. I felt like the world building and in particular the location awareness was really well done, because it's the scale of the ship is completely well communicated, but I never felt lost as to where Alpha was, or what everyone was trying to achieve. So that's more of like the sort of like functional aspect of the story, whereas earlier I was sort of praising the way that you described the story, whereas that's the actual like nuts and bolts really worked as well.
I mean, I would like to caveat that I'm not usually a science fiction writer, and there is probably some very sketchy science going on somewhere in there.
There was a lovely bit. This bit where Alpha walks through a hallway with glass exposing the outside.
Yeah.
And that she imagined she could feel the heat, and it sent me on by a little brain journey. I think people call it thinking. Where I think, I know it's not hot here, so I know I can't really feel it. But that idea that they're drifting closer to the sun, so maybe they just can. and that's really frightening. That's just loads of little moments like that add up to, and so normalized by Alpha that it really paints a picture of how in deep they are in that situation. It's really cool.
And also, I just want to, if you could hear any strange sounds while I was telling that story, the dog came in and decided to chase his tail on the couch next to me, and he tends to sort of make weird sort of whining noises when he does it. So if the microphone picked up anything, it was him.
I'm going to have to ask you to get a second mic. You don't have a damn story ready.
Mike the dog. Mike the dog. Oh, wonderful. I mean, I feel like I'm going to keep talking about it just because I really enjoyed it, and I'm trying to put off the fact that I have to go last here because I'm so stressed about this right now. TikTok indeed, but even in the opening few sentences, perhaps maybe the opening paragraph. You immediately did a huge amount of scene setting and world building with. I enjoyed wire blight, the cannibalized pipe insulation shoes. That was really cool. And also, this is very simple. Just ancient laser pistol, old, and the idea of a laser pistol.
Old and new.
Old and new. Immediately, I was just, this is going to be excellent. And I felt, I don't know if you experienced this when you're reading, but. The writer has to sort of earn my attention when I'm reading, and you had it very quickly with those phrases because I was just, this is going to be great. So yeah, and finally the burgeoning hope that the irony of the name and it working.
First note is burgeoning hope is a great name.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about there. I really enjoyed that story, and thank you for telling us because that was. I feel like I've learned something from you there.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, Ben, do you want to tell us the story?
No.
Come on, Ben.
Right, so I am going to caveat it a little bit, that I've also broken from form a little bit like Nico did. But not potentially in a sort of maybe more dull way. I don't really want to say that, but this is actually what came out when I started writing Raw was essentially the start or potentially an early section of a chapter of a new novel that I'm probably going to write at some point.
Ooh.
So it's more of an excerpt than a short story. So see what you think about it.
Go.
Raw. Laurie had never seen her face, but he had owed her his children since before he was born, and now she was gone. The custom of arranged marriages was the old way of the water lords to prevent wars. It had not worked. Alara's letters, the tone of which were always formal, had stopped 2 weeks earlier. His mother had taken that as the first sign that the Emneths were preparing for war and had issued a mustering call. Yet their dreaded attack had never arrived, and so she had mobilised her own forces to press into the nearby Emneth-held lands. Every woven village they had passed through on their journey had been empty of inhabitants, despite those people spending generations training the trees to be their homes. The silence of those bower huts, when he compared it to his own villages which clung to the warm forests of the mighty Throckan River, was oppressive. Laurie had watched apprehensively as his father's face had transitioned from determined to thoughtful to worried, and their scouting party had ridden deeper and deeper into enemy territory. He could no longer study that face he knew so well, as the old warrior had given the order that morning for all to ride in their armour as a precaution. Yet his mother's orders had been clear. Proceed until you are opposed and do not engage. Our army follows your path. That force was likely 2 days' march behind them, by Laurie's estimation, and would soon be preparing to cross the Emneth at its narrowest point. That ford had been high when Laurie's father had led his scouts across. The water had even soaked his lower legs, but he knew his mother would have little difficulty bringing the bulk of the army across it. Lady Mira Throckan was a veteran of 100 skirmishes and 2 wars. She was perhaps the finest logistician their house had ever produced. Laurie knew his mother would cross first, as was her duty as the water lord for their house, and then the peace between Throckan and Emneth would truly be broken. The scouting party rode 3 abreast on a well-worn path which ran parallel with the Emneth River. To Laurie, it felt as though the vigorous sounds of life had abandoned the water as well as the woven villages. The turgid river was nearly as wide as the Throckan, but flowed past him sluggishly. He realised, as he stared at the strange river, that he was homesick not only for his own river and his people, but for the simple life of a child he had asked to be removed from. "Is your saddle loose?" Curtis, next to him, growled the words through his bright metal visor. "No," Laurie immediately regretted that the word had come out indignantly. "Then sit up. You slouch too much and ride like a boatman." It had taken Laurie a long time to uncover the warmth of Curtis, but the grizzled soldier had a streak of kindness in him as wide as the Throckan. Laurie sat straighter and smiled. The path grew steeper as the daylight dulled around them, casting their horses, armour, and the trees in a shadowy bronze hue. Laurie kept an anxious eye on the edge of the switchback path that led up through steep hills. Those hills meant they had lost sight of the river, but it could still be heard gurgling through the rocks to the west. He had to curb his horse quickly when they suddenly reached the top, or else would have had to clatter into Curtis, who had drawn up behind his father. Laurie's father spoke over his shoulder to the party. "The citadel is dark. Where are the beacons?" "The watchfire. Not even a glimmer of water light from the windows." Laurie looked past him and saw in the dying light of the day that the Emneth citadel was indeed dark. The massive fortification clung to the cliffs that rose about the Emneth waterfall. The dull roar of the river cascading down inside the citadel could faintly be heard, and Laurie realised he had been hearing it for a while, but the noise had been so gradual he had failed to notice it. A section of the enormous water wheel of House Emneth protruded from the belly of the hanging citadel, but that too was dark and still. "They've disengaged it," Laurie whispered. "But why?" asked Curtis. "We must find out, and quickly. Curtis, you have the best seat amongst us. Ride hard ahead. My lady wife's orders still apply." His father was no longer trying to conceal his worry, and a bubble of fear burst in Laurie's belly, drenching him with clarity of the dangers of their situation. Curtis galloped ahead without another word, and the rest of the scouts spurred their horses. Laurie kicked back at his own beast's flank in order to keep pace with them. The mare tossed her head, and he knew his fear was soaking into her. Yet she obeyed him, and Laurie watched as the waterfall citadel of his betrothed grew larger as they drew nearer. Few details were clear in the last of the light, but it was obvious the fortress matched the Throcken's own for size. Massive sections of it, all fashioned from stone, jutted over the river it owed its existence to. They reached the base of the cliffs as the gibbous moons rose. Curtis had hobbled his horse and was hand-cranking the elevator as they arrived. The box of that elevator was open to the elements and suspended on a system of thick wire rope which stretched up to the dark shadows of the citadel above them. "Power's out," he grumbled. "Nothing, not even in the stores." His father sounded shocked. "It's been disconnected." "Tie up the horses. If we're to winch by hand, then only a few of us should go at a time. Laurie, with me, and lose the armour." Laurie did as he was bidden, tying up his mare to a nearby ring of metal which had been pinned into the stone of the cliff, and unclasping his armoured plates. He let them fall to the ground and rushed to get in the elevator. His father's hair was plastered to his skull from where he had worn an arming cap under his helmet, and he nodded gravely to Laurie. "I'll winch," he said, and took a wide stance before gripping the internal wheel's handles. Laurie watched as he got the wheel up to speed quickly, his wiry frame bending to push and pull with all of his might. He tried not to think of the dizzying drop around them as a gust of wind made the elevator sway. Cosima Throcken had been a spinner before his unlikely marriage to Lady Throcken. The spinners sped the wheels within a house, adding their sweat to the waterfall's gargantuan power. It was an honourable task, and one that often claimed the lives of the people that were called to it. Those spinners that felt themselves slowing with age often took the first opportunity they could to speed the wheel until their hearts gave out, a death in which there was great honour. Laurie's father would likely have died long ago, were it not for Mira's choice to shun her arranged marriage and make him her husband. Laurie watched as his father implacably winched them up the cliffside, and found a new appreciation for the stoic discipline with which the man lived his life. His clothes were sodden with sweat by the time they reached the Emneth citadel walls. The last section of the climb plunged them into near darkness as the fortress swallowed their ascending box. The entry hall they arrived in was empty, and a small amount of moonlight illuminated the gutted interior. Everything of value or grandeur had been removed, and the only sigils of House Emneth left behind were those carved into the keystones of the arched doorways which led off in many directions. This was no robbery. They have abandoned this place. Cosimar's breathing was laboured, giving his hushed tone a breathy pace. "That's good, right?" Laurie whispered. "We can claim the citadel." "Such a thing is your mother's right, but it may yet prove a poisoned chalice. Let us go to their wheel. Tread carefully." The two of them crept through the dark citadel. Laurie saw that every wall held sconces for light, just as their own fortresses did. But without the power of the wheel, they remained dark. The roar of the waterfall was dulled by the stone, but suddenly boomed as they pushed through a heavy door to find themselves at the heart of the fortress. Something clattered away from the door as his father opened it, and Laurie heard the wheel's arm groan as a counterweight began to swing it close to the rushing cascade of the waterfall. They watched, speechless, as the lip of the wheel bit into the falling water and began to turn. The noise of it, as it got up to speed, was near deafening, and Laurie saw the colossal wheel become a blur of hissing water, metal, and wood. Cosima rushed across the stone platform which lay in the shadow of that wheel, and examined the control levers. "Sabotaged, and the devils have redirected most of the charge into the river." "Mother!" Laurie exclaimed. Fear for her filled his heart instantly. "Run! Get down there now, and tell Curtis not to spare his horse. We must stop her from trying to cross. Go!"
How dare you story blueball me like that? I have never been so offended. I want more of Wet Dune. Give it to me right now.
Wet Dune is where I'm going. Yeah, unfortunately, I hit the word cap and just and basically stopped, and then edited it up, and then had to edit it back down again. So it really could not be any longer than this. And even so, I feel like just that section could do with another 500-600 words.
Oh,
Just to
but you feel so smugly satisfied as you down tools and went, that'll really upset him.
oh yeah, no, there's definitely a vibe of that. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, it's such a. I want to know.
So so they've basically electrified the river
Yeah,
that his mother. Oh my God,
yes,
that's bad.
it's really bad.
See, now I regularly take part in tabletop roleplay with Ben, and that's so par for the course. I didn't even think about the fact he was murdering an army with water wheel electricity because he just does this sort of thing to me all the time.
Or rather,
It's
getting
normally you he's murdering with water
Yeah,
wheel electricity.
Look, if I
You're
choose to sail
you're
a
a bit of
longboat down an aqueduct, it's fine.
you're a bit of a D&D player yourself, I think. Anna, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, when obviously the pandemic happened, I had been sort of going over to a friend's and playing. Well, I think it was once a month. We've been doing that for sort of 6 months, and then obviously that sort of ground to a halt. And we did a few sessions online afterwards, and then I had another group that I ran a mini campaign for them. Which was my first time DMing. It was supposed to be a one shot and ended up being about 6 sessions long because I
Always the way.
obviously overplanned everything.
Yeah.
And also because, you can't get a bunch of people to go 200 meters down a corridor in less than 4 hours, apparently, in a game of D&D. So yes, but also I think you're trying to distract us from your stories.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It feels quite vulnerable because it's obviously it's a section rather than a completed story, and I think that's giving me a bit of nerves.
It has absolutely got legs, though. It's got momentum, and it's got there's already emotion and pathos in there, and intrigue. I mean, was it actually sorry, what are they called? The Mneth?
Mneth, yeah, that's it.
Is it the Mneth who have done this? Have they abandoned and then set up this booby trap, or is there another force that has maybe wiped them out? So there's a lot of mystery in this sort of opening 1500 words.
I've got to do my fantasy story digging immediately. So are these all humanoids? Are they all what you would classify as in D&D, for example, as a human?
I think so. I think I've always struggled with to write fantasy that is from the point of view of like a dwarf or an elf or whatever.
Yeah.
I think I have my roots are quite firmly in low fantasy, which typically doesn't see as much of that. So yeah, I think for me they are. I mean, at the moment, because none of the rest of it's written, you can think whatever you want. But for me they're human. I think.
I think if you're going to explore it, a really fun thing, and you actually see it a lot in Warhammer 40,000 novels, but is to have humans who are slightly adapted to their environment. So it'd be really cool if like the Mneth have webbed toes or whatever, either through.
Yeah, I was just going to say give the Waterlord gills, or something that's like part of the status of being the Waterlord.
Yeah, I think where I'm sort of going with it, I think if just to sort of spell it out a bit, cause perhaps I haven't really gone there enough, is that the state of art is far higher inside the citadels because they've harnessed the power of water to create a sort of rudimentary, either like a system of gears and stuff, or like actual electricity, which is what's happened in this story. But the rest of their like serfs or citizens or whatever they be called, they live a very connected to nature life. Like they don't build houses with materials they've hacked out of a rock. They train trees slowly.
Yeah, the tree shaping was very cool.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah.
So perhaps in terms of the status thing, the status is that they have this metal armor. They have the the access. They're used to electrical lighting, this kind of thing. But also I think there is room for them to have adapted a little bit to this in a way that the others potentially haven't. So that's a cool bit of feedback. I like that.
Even if it's just like they're a real royalty class inbreed, so they've got more fingers and they're a bit webbed or whatever, and they take that as sort of a sign of water blessing, but it's actually that they're just
Oh, I like that. Yeah, a bit sort of grimmer with it.
Family Tree is more of a family rope.
Oh,
I really liked the you managed to get quite a few um water-based metaphors in there, which I thought was really nice, and it really sort of drew everything together.
mm,
So I wrote down drenching him with clarity, fear soaking in, and plunged into near darkness. And I liked how you sort of consciously or possibly unconsciously took this sort of real affinity for water and the status and power that it conveys, and it's like that's how your characters think. They think in terms of water. I always really
yeah.
love that. It's such a great world building tactic. It really grounds your characters in their world without having to do a massive info dump about the world, because it's how
Yeah.
they view the world, and we are viewing it through them. So yeah, I
I like.
really like that.
Well, that's very kind. It was actually intentional, because I think I'm probably going to make the perspective even more limited, perhaps potentially with some like internal monologue stuff happening, sort of a la Germ and that kind of those kind of writers. So I think I was starting to do that with the bits that you mentioned where he's, it's a third person limited, and it's soaked into the descriptions as well. Yeah, I
Mm.
I had a lot of fun writing this, but as I'm saying, as I'm saying that, I'm also painfully aware that it's essentially around a first draft of a novel, really, isn't it? Even though I have edited this, it's trying to get a lot across quite quickly. And how do you deal with world building in your novels? I'm potentially stealing a question from the interview bit, but I'm interested here because that's what I'm sort of battling with here, I think.
I mean, I think you've made a really good start. I mean, I would say, I think because you've sort of possibly you've edited this with this episode in mind, so
Yeah.
you might have crammed more stuff in than you would have if it was just the opening to a novel,
Yeah,
because
that's fair.
obviously you've got another 100,000 words to
Yeah.
bring all of this stuff in, rather than just like trying to really establish relationships and magical systems and technology within 1,500 words. So I'm a very big fan of drip feeding history and lore and stuff like that. Usually through conversation or dialogue. So I don't really do prologues or a foreword of 2,000 years of the civilization
Yeah.
before the point at which the story starts.
Yeah.
And particularly with my current trilogy, the Songs of the Drowned trilogy, a lot of readers' reviews have been, we just get thrown right in the middle and I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, well, I can't describe what every single thing is because it's through a character's point of view. So for me, it's that old joke, isn't it? Oh, hello, my cousin Bob, who I have not seen in 5 years. It's
Yes.
not how you talk to each other. It's not how you interact with your own world. If you are intimately familiar with your world, then you don't notice the things that aren't standard to the readers because the reader doesn't exist. Only your world exists. So I tend to just, well, these are my characters and this is the world they live in, and the readers just got to work it out for themselves. I'm quite cruel. I'm
I mean,
like, you're
no.
intelligent. You'll figure it out. It's fine.
Trust your audience for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't it be interesting to walk around talking like that for a day and see what people make of you? I just sort of like, hello, Nico, that I host a podcast with. How are you doing today?
Very well, Ben, my friend from university, 10 years ago until now. Honestly, guys, if you are writing a story and you feel people start saying what sort of familial relationships they're having with the other people, what you're actually writing is pornography. So stop. just wind it back and realize that no one talks like that in real life.
Stop or get a camera, I guess.
Really like you buckle down.
But I really enjoyed that feedback, and I'm just going to mention, I think, here that that Anna, that you offer writing courses on your website. So
I do, yeah.
Yes.
So at the moment, I've just got a world building course. I've got a couple of other courses that are sort of in the planning stages, but I haven't actually got around to creating and recording the content for yet. But yeah, I offer an 8-week world building course that's basically is suitable for any speculative fiction that you write. So if you write like hard sci-fi, soft sci-fi, epic fantasy, urban fantasy, we try and cover as many of the bases as possible. And I mean, when it comes down to it, whatever type of speculative element you choose, the way you approach writing it should really be the same. That what I was saying about don't over explain things, and your characters exist in this world. So if it's natural to them, they're not going to look at it in an unnatural way. So yeah, it's been good. I've had some really good students who've come up with some amazing world building.
That's really exciting. That must be to help nurture. That must be really rewarding.
Yeah, it's really, really good because I offer 3 different levels. So the bronze level is like a self-study. The silver level is you do the work on your own, but then you have a group video call with me. And so I'll sort of go through you get homework every week, and I'll go through and sort of feedback on your homework, and then we'll have a group chat about it. And then the gold tier is all the same, but you have a one-to-one chat, so you can really sort of spend the whole hour of the video call sort of going like really in depth just on your piece of work. Whereas obviously if you're in the group, we have to sort of treat sort of cover everyone equally, sort of thing.
I mean, you can still do it, but you'd be a dick.
Just hog it,
yeah. I mean, I would just say thank you, and we're going to move on to someone else.
You're welcome. And what I was thinking in terms of goblins in this,
yeah. But what I did find with the group was that as they all got to know each other's works in progress and the world building that they were doing, they were bouncing ideas around as well. So, one of them would say, well, what did you think about this? And although the others haven't read the exercises, we could do a little brief description, and then they were saying, oh, well, have you thought about this? And oh, what about that? And we've got a little Discord channel as well, and you could see some of them are like sort of carrying on the conversation afterwards and swapping snippets and giving feedback and stuff. And it's really, really good.
Sounds great.
So if anybody wants to, because I know that we have people listening that are either already professional authors or are budding writers or journeymen or whatever you want to, however you want to describe it. But is the best way to access these courses through your website?
Yes. So it's just it's anna-stevens.com. Stevens with a PH. And then there's literally a tab called writing courses or online writing courses or something.
Brilliant.
I didn't expect your middle name to be Dash.
It's cool though.
It's like The Incredibles.
I went Dash Rendar in my head actually, so I don't know whether that's just being a bit too Star Warsy. Right, well, I think this has been potentially the most disparate set of 3 we've had for a very long while. We've had epic poetry, an actual short story from our guest who's showing us how it was done, and then I've given you an excerpt of a novel that I've yet to write. So I think we can. Normally at this stage we sort of pat ourselves on the back, but for this one I'm just like, what a weird episode, but I enjoyed it.
We do have something in common though, because I very rarely write science fiction. So, unless Nico writes, a lot of epic poetry, and
that's the first one I've heard from him, and it blew my socks off. So yeah, I think he potentially should.
We've all done something slightly. We've all done something slightly outside of outside of the remit or outside of our comfort zone.
I think so.
And if you don't like it, go to your local MP, and they can come to us.
But before you do that, go to your local library.
Yes, definitely.
So, Anna, where is the best place for people to... We've already had your website, which is anna-stevens.com, but where should people follow you on social media?
Okay, so I am still on the Dead Bird site.
X.
X. This is an X parrot. So most of my social media is actually under my married name. So my handle for Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky is Anna Smith Writes. Writes as in writes novels. But basically, if you search Anna Stevens with a PH, then you're gonna find me on all of those. I'm sort of on TikTok, but it's mostly just videos of the dog
Chasing its own tail.
Chasing his own tail, or falling into canals or what have you. And I'm on Facebook as well. As Anna Stevens. So just the usuals, really. But yeah, I'm on Blue Sky, and I quite like Blue Sky at the moment.
This is a bit of an aside, but is it still invite only? Is that still where it is? Or
It is still invite only. Yeah, it's still in beta testing. But it is starting to ramp up. That I'm following probably about 150 people on there now, and they're nearly all writers or writing adjacent people. So yeah, it's definitely starting to get busier.
Fantastic.
We'll just have to see what happens.
Had you considered Threads or not?
I did, but then I heard there was people saying that if you keep like separate accounts, so if you have like a professional login and a personal login, for example, and you wanted to keep the two separate, because you come from it or you operate it from the same IP address, then what would happen is that your professional account would show up in recommended. This account is recommended for you to all the people in your personal account.
Right.
So that wouldn't be like a problem for me personally, but the example that was given was people who are sex workers or something like that, and maybe not all of their family knows, and they want to, if all of a sudden, your sex work account was being recommended to your granny on Threads, then So there were just
what a messy
issues.
Situation.
Yeah, there are just issues around security and privacy with Threads, and I just thought, I don't do sex work, but if I just wanted to keep like 1 degree of separation between my professional Instagram and like my private Facebook page, then I don't know how easy that would be to do. So
it's fascinating. Interesting.
Issues with security. That doesn't sound like Zuckerberg.
An invasion of privacy, never.
I didn't think we were going to slam Zuck right at the end of this episode, but I'm glad we're here. I think
Suck it, Zuckerberg.
I really enjoyed this journey with you, but I think it's probably time to move on to the next episode. So join us next week for, hearing Anna's answers to our new interview questions, and we'll explore and deep dive onto her writing style and her work and more outlooks on life and this kind of thing. So thank you again, Anna.
You're very welcome.
We'll see you in a minute.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For
rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne, and for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?